You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. On Tuesday, Hamilton County voters will be asked to approve a levy to fund the mental health system, issue number 5 on the Hamilton County ballot. The proposed levy covers 5 years. It includes a $2.47 million renewal of the present levy that was passed in 1998. It also includes a $0.27 million increase and will generate $165 million over its 5-year life. If the levy passes, the owner of a house valued at $100,000 will pay approximately $54 a year. That would amount to an increase of approximately $7.95 per year over the current levy. To discuss the mental health levy, I am joined first by Pat Tribbe, the President and CEO of the Hamilton County Mental Health Board, and Dr. Tracey Skale, a psychiatrist and the medical director at QCM, one of the many provider agencies that actually deliver the mental health services to county residents. Welcome to Newsmakers. Pat, welcome back in your case. Glad to have you back here. You know, this is an area that I think we spout numbers in and whatever, but I'd like to make sure that we focus. Dr. Skale, what is, when we talk about mental illness, and in this case mental health, but what is the range of diseases? What is it we're talking about here?
Good question, because I think there's a lot of mystery around what is mental illness, and people are frightened by mental illness. But it's a very broad range, and we know that mental illness affects 1 out of 5 people in Hamilton County. It ranges from depression, which a lot of people can relate to, which can affect up to 25% of the population can have some experience with some kind of mood disorder at some point, to things like schizophrenia, which is a psychotic disorder, schizoaffective disorder, which is a combination of a psychotic disorder and a mood disorder, and bipolar disorder, which we're hearing more and more about in the media.
Which, in shorthand,
used to be called manic depressive disorder. People remember that, but it's extreme highs, not necessarily euphoria, sometimes high irritability, and extreme lows of depression.
You know, one of the things, Pat, about this is mental health, mental illness. This is the mental health board that you represent. I want to make sure people are clear. This is different than mental retardation.
Yes.
And that's a different levy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your board oversees exactly what here?
Right. The two boards are actually set up by statute differently to deal with 2 different disorders or problems or issues in our community. And the Mental Health Board is charged with the responsibility of funding the agencies in Hamilton County that provide mental health services.
Okay, and those agencies, at the top of one of the reports I read of yours here, on your annual report, which is accessible on your website, by the way, if I count right, there are 47 agencies. Now, maybe that number has changed slightly, but you're really delivering this through a lot of different services, a lot of different individual agencies.
I think it gives some indication of the scope of services that are provided in Hamilton County that range from some of the typical services that you might think about of someone having to be hospitalized, in the hospital for a short period of time, to services that range into the vocational and the housing area, which for many of our individuals coming through our system who do better are able to return to work, to establish their own housing, and to live very productively in our community. So the broad range of services are necessary. In
fact, QCM, these are agencies that most of us probably don't know a lot about. What does QCM, as one of these 47 agencies, what does your agency do?
Well, at Queen City Mitchell, we provide services for adults with mental illness. So we serve people over 18 that have a known mental illness diagnosis, and those are neurobiological illnesses. So it's depression and the bipolar and the schizophrenia, like we mentioned, and anxiety disorders. We provide the med-somatic services, which is what people know to be seeing a psychiatrist, medications, things like that. We will hospitalize if need be, but our goal is to help keep people out of the hospital and help people reintegrate into society. So besides psychiatrists, we have many, many case managers, and really the bulk of the work falls on the backs of the case managers. They help people get housing, benefits, food, into job training programs, et cetera.
And that's really one of the points about this, is that the creation of the Mental Health Board back in the 60s was really to get people out of hospitals for long times. So keeping people in hospitals is not what we do anymore, is that right?
Absolutely. And In our system, for example, there were several thousand people in the hospital years ago, and at any given point now it's probably around 100 individuals that spend some time in the state institution. But again, the goal is to make that a very short stay. The broad range of services that are funded by the levy are community-based services that are in fact keyed towards keeping people in what we would call a less restrictive environment, more in community-based services.
Perhaps in a group home or even out in their own apartments with the services that are necessary.
Services.
And I think I need to reveal, I have a little bit of a conflict. My son works for a parallel agency to yours called CRI that provides those same kinds of services. So, just so everybody knows that. One of the things that you've been doing is you've been running a couple of television commercials in relationship to the levy. I want to show one of those because I think it brings up an interesting point. Let's take a look at that right now.
Mental illness is indiscriminate. It can strike anyone at any time. And it's not rare. In Hamilton County alone, it's estimated that 1 in 5 people suffer from a mental illness. Thanks to the mental health levy, children and adults in crisis receive the help they need. Mental health works in Hamilton County. On May 7th, please vote yes on issue 5.
Dr. Skale, you mentioned earlier the 1 in 5 number. Where does that come from? I mean, that seems huge, I think, to the average person.
One of the things I think that helped raise everybody's awareness about how this actually affects lives in our community and other communities was the Surgeon General report that came out a few years ago. And I think this is where we started to see really how prevalent mental illness was. And I think to raise a whole new awareness about not only the severe illnesses that Tracey was talking about, but the things that people go through in their everyday lives, like
Anxiety.
depression, family issues, kids having problems in schools because of mental health issues. And so I think that was a great boost in terms of raising all of our awareness about how big the need is in our community.
One of the things about this levy is it's a renewal of the current levy.
Correct.
And therefore it's continuing to provide for the services that already exist. But there is also an increase here. And the increase, I'm sure, comes partly from just the things become more expensive, but also there are some new services here. I'd like to explore 2 areas. One is the area of greater need for children's services. As I understand that right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
A couple of pieces in this levy, and as you indicated, is an increase. It's a renewal plus an increase. And one of the key areas that we continue to focus on at the Mental Health Board is services to children. I think that over the years, nationally, folks have done and systems have done a good job of treating adults, but we're really just starting to learn what some of the major components and some of the key components are for treating children in our system. And so the levy actually budgets $1 million annually extra for additional children's services. And I hope that our goal is to move towards case management services, much like is being offered at Queen City for adults, for children, so that we can actually help them maneuver through some of our systems that they're involved in. Because typically the child in our system is not only involved with the Mental Health Board, but may be involved with the juvenile court or jobs and family through the children's services. And so we really need some individual or case management person to help them survive through some of those systems in terms of getting better and moving back with their families.
Again, I'm aware of what maybe people know and what they don't know, because what I didn't know, case management. You two use it just casually. What is case management? What does that mean?
It probably helps to think of it in terms of social work. I mean, it's somebody it's a person that is it's coordinating the services, whether meeting the needs of that particular mental health consumer, whether it's housing or needing to see a psychiatrist or needing to get a GED, whatever the getting food for that night or shelter, whatever the services that person needs, that CSP, community service provider or case manager is the person that makes that happen. Okay,
so it's a person who coordinates all those professional services
Correct.
Out there. Other area of growth is a proposal to create a mental health court. This is something we've talked about on Newsmakers before. John Dallon's been here. What would this do? How would this change things?
I think, first of all, when we talk about a mental health court, the additional levy funding will not go into the court itself, but will actually go into services that will surround the court operation as it relates to individuals who have a mental illness that come through the court. I think nationally we've seen articles and papers indicating that when individuals came out of institutions, in many cases they ended up in our jails and our prisons, and I think there's some truth to that. And so in Hamilton County we've put in several components, but this mental health court is actually a focus on individuals who are seriously mentally ill, who in fact cycle through the courts, low-level misdemeanor types of crimes, but in fact it's their mental illness really that is causing some of their court problems.
Yeah, I have to say that in an earlier discussion of this on Newsmakers, it was estimated in our local jails maybe as high as 40% of the people have serious mental health issues. And what this would do is it take people, as I understand, it would take people with misdemeanor issues, the small things, and get them out of that court prison situation. But if people commit felonies, serious crimes, that's still a court issue. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct. It depends on, there are probably 8 or 9 courts nationally that are operating, and in most cases I think they do start at the misdemeanor level, trying to deal with nonviolent kind of low-level misdemeanor individuals and break that cycle, find appropriate treatment services.
Your agency deals with adults,
Correct.
Focuses on adults. What's the impact of a person with mental illness who gets caught up in that court system? What does that do to a real person? How important is this from your perspective?
It's so important. We're really looking forward to this coming to fruition, because people will, because of their mental illness, they might not be taking their medicine, they might not be thinking clearly, and they go into the trespass, for example, or there's they steal some cookies from a store, and they end up in the court system, and they're traumatized. It's frightening to be down in the court system anyway, and if you're already feeling anxious or paranoid or depressed, it just exacerbates everything.
If you have a client who gets caught up in that sort of situation, are you able, is your agency or is your case manager able to really continue to work with that person while they're in jail?
We do, actually. We try very hard to make sure that the case manager goes into the jail and sees them and communicates with whatever the staff that they can communicate. There's typically nursing involved down at the courts, and in fact we've been able to we try to bring their medicine into the jails if we can.
But the chance is there's going to be discontinuity in
Correct.
the services provided.
And it's not ideal, but we try the best we can to keep continuity going.
This is about a levy, and I want to we have to stay focused on some numbers here. And let's take a look at some of the numbers. The 2000 Mental Health Board Annual Report, which, by the way, is available, as I mentioned, on the website, breaks out statistics and revenues and expenditures for the system. On the revenue side, the county mental health system had revenues of $70.5 million. Almost 40% came from the county levy, very important, while 30% came from state grants and 23.5% came from Medicaid. There's some other small sources. On the expenditure side, over 91% goes to the 47 provider agencies that we've been talking about. Salaries and operating costs for the board amount to about 4.5%. People are always concerned about the efficient use of tax dollars. What can you say, what can you report about the levels of efficiency that you've been able to create here?
I think the numbers speak for themselves in terms of getting most of the dollars that come to us out to the contract providers. We think that's very critical, that those dollars go to services, because as you can tell by some of the numbers we've been talking about 23,000 plus individuals we treat on an annual basis in the system, and the need for the comprehensive services, I think, is just critical in terms of the dollars being spent. But accountability is a big issue. I think that's one of the things we have focused on the last 4 years, since the last levy, because we are spending a lot of tax dollars that come from the community, that come from the state, and we need to be very accountable, and I think the Mental Health Board is.
Okay, stay right there.
Okay.
We're going to take a break, but we've been dealing with facts and figures, but any health-related issue is ultimately about people, real people. After the break, we'll be joined by someone who has suffered from mental illness and has been helped by the services of the levy. Welcome back. Unlike people who suffer from cancer, heart disease, or AIDS, television news and newspapers rarely do feature stories on adults and children who suffer from different mental illnesses. The popular and acclaimed movie, A Beautiful Mind, as well as the Pulitzer Prize and Tony Prize winning play, Proof, which, by the way, is coming to the Cincinnati Playhouse next season, have recently helped reveal the human stories behind all the statistics about schizophrenia and manic depression, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, mental health workers, like medical health workers, are treating one complex individual at a time, people who are more than their disease. We are now joined by Tribbe Owens, who has benefited from the mental health services of the levy and also has suffered from mental health and is a patient of Dr. Scale's. Welcome to Newsmakers, and thank you for being here. And I certainly thank Dr. Scales for making the recommendation.
Pleasure.
How old are you at this stage?
I'm 38.
And how long have you suffered from
Since I was 19, so roughly 20 years.
And Dr. Scales, that's not unusual, is that right? That's a not uncommon time period in a person's life for an onset of these problems?
Actually, that's right on when typically these illnesses strike, right in the prime of life. You hear about people in their late high school years, early college years when this happens.
Yeah, and that was something that I had no idea about, that there was such a focus on that. And what is it that you've suffered from?
Well, I've suffered from many, many symptoms over the years. When you talk about manic depressive or bipolar, I've had huge depressions where I was suicidal, and I've had huge manias where I thought I would levitate off the planet, essentially. But all were dysfunctional. They were not a normal process of
And how extreme was this? What did it mean practically in your life to have?
Well, it destroyed my life. It was a destroying portion of my life because I would have to go into the hospital and be either brought from depression to normalcy, or from mania down to normalcy with medications. And my schizoaffective diagnosis, it didn't work, and that's why I had so many hospitalizations.
How many times have you been hospitalized?
I have been hospitalized 75 times, and that's just a very large number.
Yeah.
I'm called a heavy user of services, but there was never a balance there, a combination of medicines. I've tried 90 in 20 years, 90 different medications, and the combinations also. And finally, Dr. Scale here, with the help of Summit Behavioral, got me on Zyprexa.
Which is what a lot of people know as Lewis Center, but it is now called Summit Behavioral,
Right.
so just so everybody knows. And Dr. Scale was able to what?
She was able to introduce the Zyprexa and the other medications that I'm on now, and introduce a balance of medications in my life.
And how long ago did that happen?
We're going on 3 years.
We're going on two.
Two, forgive me.
But that's exciting because if you think of 75 hospitalizations in 38 years, or from 19 on, Troy was hospitalized multiple times a year for his entire adult life.
Absolutely.
And Troy, you shared with me that there was 1 year that you were out of the hospital for about a whole year, but he was so heavily sedated on traditional medications that he was basically in a zombie-like state.
There was 1 year that I did have no hospitalizations, but I can't remember exactly which combination it was, but I was just basically propped up against the wall, kind of thing. You know?
And now we're approaching 2 years out of the hospital, which is just fantastic.
And the medication that you mentioned,
Zyprexa?
this is all the world I don't know anything about. Was this new?
This is a newer medication. There are many, what we call the atypical, or in Zyprexa's case, a broad-spectrum psychotropic, meaning much like you would hear about broad-spectrum antibiotics that your internist would use. This is a medication that happens to work on very many receptor sites in the brain, and for Troy, it's worked beautifully. There are many other newer medications as well.
Troy, what does this mean? We talked about what your condition, symptoms, what it meant for you for so many years with all of these hospitalizations and whatever. What's your situation now?
Well, my situation now is that I'm out of pain, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And that's a triumph, because most people don't understand that mental illness is a painful illness. It does cause serious pain. And when the pain is alleviated by chemical and therapy and so forth, you learn that life is back as a pleasure and not a horrible thing. And there's so many people that don't know they're ill. And there are so many people that are ill and still not taking charge of their illness that it's really cost effective, in my mind, that the mental health to be treated by the mental health system instead of emergency care or hospitalizations care, because just like me, those people can find a balance of medications and be what I call a mostly normal life.
Pat, one of the things is if a person is experiencing problems, or you're a relative of someone who you believe is having mental illness problems, you know, we talked about all these different agencies that are under your board. How do you even get started? How do you know who to call? How does a person reach out for help?
I think this is one of the things that a few years ago that we took a strong look at, because obviously access to services is very critical. And so the board put in place about 5 years ago what we call our mental health access point. And for the community, it's very simple. It's one number, 558-8888. They can pick up the phone, a family member, a relative, and make a call to mental health access point, and they will begin the process of learning about what services are out there and what services would be very effective for their family member.
What's your living situation now?
Well, I live with a friend. I rent part of a room in his home. I'm on my own and independent. I still must have my medications, and I'm...
Is that any problem for you? I know we hear people talk about going off meds.
Well, that's unwise, but the medication is what stabilizes my life, so that's what you take primary focus to. But I now can live my life, but yet I still can't work.
You know, why is that? You and I talked before the show, and I was totally surprised by this.
Well, what it is that the Medicaid ruling for Ohio is $65, no more than $65 a month.
You cannot earn more than $65 a month,
right?
Or what happens?
Or dollar for dollar, my Social Security is taken away from me, and my medicines are $1,000 a month. So how can I work and get $1,000 worth of medication a month and take my Social Security? It's just impossible. Given that,
are you able to volunteer?
Yes.
Are you able to find meaningful
I
work? But I'm not talking about pay now, but meaningful work?
Well, right now I work at the CAT program as a volunteer.
Which is?
Which is the Community Access to Technology program. I'm a volunteer there that teaches the kids as well as sets up things for other kids and makes the program technical part of the program better.
Tracey, one of the things that I think is important here, and it comes through in this story, is that I think a lot of people, when they think about mental illness, you revert back to those old childhood images of people laying on couches and just talking. The point is, medicine, there is a chemical basis for a lot of these problems, and medicine can help.
Medicine,
is
absolutely.
that part of the story here?
Absolutely, and they are brain illnesses. We talked about heart disease and cancer and things like this. This is a brain illness. And it's no longer is the thinking that a person is weak or they should just pull themselves up by the bootstraps. There's a chemical basis for what's going on. It's not as easily defined as checking a blood pressure or checking for fever, but it's a combination of things. There are wonderful medications out there now with fewer side effects, not the horrible side effects that Troy experienced early in life. And also, it's the relationship is a key too. I mean, Troy is at a point in his life that he's ready to stay on medications and stay healthy, and he's with a therapist, he's with me, he's with a case manager, and the combinations work beautifully.
Yeah. And what I wanted to say was the stigma of mental illness should disappear, because again, it's brain chemistry, it's simple, it's not simple to do, but it's simple answers in medications, and it's just a matter of following a and following the regimen of medications, so that when the combination comes together, so you're on medication, that's okay. And it's not morally wrong to be mentally ill, or it's not less than.
Well, you know, one of the important things for that to happen is that we get to a point where people who have mental illness are willing and able and find the forums to talk out loud about it, and not just be talked about by as well-meaning as all the social workers and doctors are and reporters.
Yes.
And consequently, I really appreciate your willingness to be here this morning, because that is what's really important. And thank you for being here this morning. We will be down at the board on Tuesday night, and we'll see what happens. But good luck. Tuesday is election day, so
Yes,
everybody should know that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week for a discussion of a new effort to bring the school board and the City Council of Cincinnati into a new cooperative relationship. Have a good week.